I want to start with something that bothered me this week. I was going through March 2026 economic bulletins from the African Development Bank, routine reading for me, and buried inside a footnote about energy import projections was this sentence. Brent crude price assumptions have been revised upward by 13.4% following geopolitical instability in Q1 2026. That's bureaucratic language for a war started, and nobody in that report wanted to say it out loud. The war they're tiptoeing around is Operation Epic Fury, and I genuinely believe it is the most consequential geopolitical event for Africa in the last 15 years. More disruptive, potentially, than even the 2022 Russia-Ukraine conflict. And the reason most Africans haven't fully processed it yet is because the framing has been entirely wrong. Every news anchor is asking, what does this mean for Israel? What does this mean for Iran? What does it mean for Trump's approval ratings? Nobody is asking the question that actually keeps me up at night. What does it mean for a mother in Dar es Salaam buying cooking gas next month? What does it mean for a government in Bamako that signed a defense deal with Tehran in early 2026? What does it mean for a Nigerian oil minister calculating his country's budget surplus right now? Those are the questions we're going to answer today. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you will never see a Middle East conflict the same way again. Let me give you the factual timeline, because I've watched a lot of coverage and the chaos of the first 72 hours created a fog that I want to cut through. February 28th, 2026, 2 a.m. Tehran time. U.S. and Israeli aircraft cross into Iranian airspace and begin what would become over 2,000 coordinated strikes across 3 days. The targets were not random. They were sequenced with a cold, deliberate logic. Communications infrastructure first, then military command centers, then air defense systems, then nuclear facilities. This is the textbook architecture of what military planners call a decapitation strike, designed not just to destroy capability, but to eliminate the decision-making structure of a government. Within hours, Iran's internet went dark. Senior IRGC commanders, dead. Naval headquarters, destroyed. And according to multiple regional reports, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed at his compound. Now, here is where I want to offer you something the mainstream coverage missed. Trump named this Operation Epic Fury and publicly stated the goal was regime change within 4 to 5 weeks. That is extraordinarily unusual language from a sitting U.S. president. The U.S. has not officially declared war since 1941. What we witnessed in late February 2026 was, legally and historically speaking, one of the most aggressive unilateral military actions in post-World War II history. Iran did retaliate. Missiles and drones targeted U.S. bases in Iraq. Kuwait's airport was struck. UAE facilities were hit. 6 American service members were killed. But here is the brutal arithmetic of modern asymmetric warfare. Iran was fighting with the weapons of 2005, ballistic missiles, conventional drones, while the United States deployed stealth platforms, precision hypersonic systems, and cyber weapons that Iran simply has no counter to. It was not a battle, it was a demonstration. And that demonstration was never only for Iran. I want to talk about a piece of geography that most Africans have never visited, but that quietly controls a significant portion of the continent's economic life. The Strait of Hormuz, 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. That's roughly the distance from Lagos Island to the mainland. And through that 33-kilometer gap flows approximately 20 million barrels of oil every single day. That's 20% of all global oil demand and 30% of all seaborne oil trade. Every time the world's biggest economies wake up in the morning and turn the lights on, a significant portion of that electricity traces back to crude that passed through this strait. When Operation Epic Fury launched, Iran's first threat wasn't another missile. It was a declaration that it would mine and close the Strait of Hormuz. Tanker owners didn't wait for that to happen. They suspended shipments immediately. Hundreds of oil tankers dropped anchor and refused to move. The market did what markets do when supply is threatened while demand stays constant. It panicked. On March 3rd, 2026, 4 days after strikes began, Brent crude jumped 13% in a single trading day, the largest single-day spike in 3 years. By end of day, it had settled at 8.5% higher. Analysts I follow were already modeling a scenario where oil hits $100 per barrel if the conflict continues for more than 6 weeks. And here's the part that the financial media covered for exactly 1 paragraph before moving on. That price increase didn't stay on a trading floor in London or New York. It traveled within days to every fuel import terminal in Africa. Kenya imports 100% of its petroleum products, every liter. Ghana's refinery at Tema processes imported crude. If the crude price goes up, everything downstream goes up. South Africa is integrated into global energy markets. Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Mozambique, all net importers. When the oil price spikes, transportation costs for food rise, which means food prices rise, which means the inflation that central banks across the continent spent 2024 and 2025 painstakingly bringing down starts climbing again. Senegal's prime minister issued a public warning about this almost immediately. The African Union called it a crisis with serious implications for energy markets and food security. These are not dramatic statements. They are accurate ones. But, and this is where it gets genuinely complicated, not everyone in Africa loses. Nigeria exports approximately 1.5 million barrels per day. Its 2026 budget was modeled on oil at $64 to $66 per barrel. At the time of this recording, it's trading above $72 and rising. If it holds at $100, Nigeria generates billions in unbudgeted revenue. Ghana's gold is up 2% since the war started, and gold has already climbed 25% in 2026. Mali, Burkina Faso, South Africa, major gold producers, all watching their export values rise. So the Iran war is not creating a uniform African crisis. It's creating a divergence. Commodity exporters win. Everyone else pays. Now, I want to talk about something the oil price story actually distracts from, because I think the diplomatic message of Operation Epic Fury is more consequential for Africa's long-term future than any single commodity price spike. Let me give you a specific date. February 23rd, 2026. 5 days before the strikes began, Burkina Faso's defense minister, Major General Salistan Sempere, was in Tehran. He met with Iran's defense minister. They signed defense cooperation agreements. Iran praised Burkina Faso's popular revolution against colonialism. Sempere publicly expressed solidarity with the Iranian people and their resistance against external domination. 5 days later, U.S. missiles killed the Iranian supreme leader and destroyed the military infrastructure of the country Sempere had just pledged solidarity with. Think about that timing. I don't believe it was coincidental. I believe it was deliberate. Burkina Faso is not alone. Sudan received Iranian surveillance and combat drones, and Tehran helped arm the Sudanese military through 2024 into 2025. Eritrea has received Iranian weapons systems. Ethiopia signed a security memorandum of understanding with Iran in May 2025, and Iranian drone technology played a documented role in the Tigray conflict in 2022. South Africa participated in joint naval exercises with Iran in January 2026, 6 weeks before the bombs fell. The South African National Defense Force's own leadership met with Iranian military commanders in August 2025, using language about alignment against global arrogance. Every single one of those governments watched what happened to their partner, and every single one of them received a message that didn't need to be written down in any diplomatic cable. The message is, we know who your friends are, and we just showed you what we do to your friends. I want to be precise here, because I think there is a lazy reading of this situation and a more accurate one. The lazy reading is, America is evil and bullying small nations. The more accurate reading is, America is executing a strategy that has been consistent for decades, and African governments that are only now discovering this consistency are dangerously late to the understanding. The United States has never, and I want to be clear about this, has never actually opposed African independence as a concept. What it has consistently opposed since the Cold War is African independence that involves meaningful alignment with adversarial powers. The moment a country's independence becomes operationally useful to a rival power, that independence becomes a threat, and threats historically get dealt with. Now, before I go further, I want to address something, because the last time I did a video touching on African sovereignty, I got a comment, and I'm paraphrasing, that said, "You're just telling us we're weak. What's the point? We already know this." And I sat with that comment for a while, because it's a fair challenge. Here is my honest response. I am not making a video to tell you Africa is weak. I'm making this video because I disagree with the growing narrative in certain Pan-Africanist circles that symbolic defiance is the same as strategic positioning, that waving a flag at the West or switching alliance partners from Paris to Moscow to Beijing is, by itself, a form of liberation. It is not. And the Iran example is the clearest proof of that in a generation. Iran was, by any measure, one of the most disciplined, patient, strategically sophisticated examples of resistance to Western pressure in the last 50 years. They survived decades of sanctions and built domestic industries. They developed their own military technology. They partnered with Russia and China. They built a network of regional allies, from Lebanon to Yemen. And in early February 2026, they were arguably winning the long game. And then, in 72 hours, it was gone. So the point of this video is not to say give up. The point is to say the bar for genuine sovereignty is much higher than most of our leaders are willing to admit in public. And until we're honest about how high that bar is, we will keep celebrating moves that feel bold but leave us exposed. Here's the argument I want to make, and I'm prepared for people to disagree with it. Sovereignty, as it is currently practiced by most African states, is not sovereignty. It is a franchise. A franchise, like a restaurant that carries a famous brand name but operates under conditions set by headquarters. You can decorate the walls however you like. You can hire local staff and write local menus and call it yours. But the core terms of operation, the things that actually matter, those are set somewhere else. And if you violate them, the franchise gets pulled. Iran ran its franchise for 45 years after the 1979 revolution. They decorated the walls very differently from what Washington wanted. They hired their own security personnel, built their own weapons, wrote their own foreign policy. But when they crossed the threshold, when the combination of nuclear capability, regional military reach, and expanding partnerships with Russia, China, and Africa made them genuinely threatening to Western strategic dominance, the franchise agreement was terminated, with extreme prejudice. Now, I want to compare this to something from a different era, because I think historical comparisons clarify what contemporary rhetoric obscures. Think about the Kingdom of Dahomey in the late 19th century. In the 1880s and early 1890s, Dahomey was one of the most organized, militarily capable, economically sophisticated states in West Africa. King Bahanzin modernized his army, negotiated with European powers, played France and Britain against each other with real skill. In 1890, he actually defeated French forces in a significant battle. The West African press of the time celebrated this as proof that African sovereignty could be defended through military modernization. 2 years later, France returned with a larger force, better weapons, and a general, Alfred Amédée Dodds, who had specifically studied Dahomey's tactics. Bahanzin fought brilliantly. He lost anyway, and Dahomey became a French colony. The lesson of Dahomey is not that resistance is hopeless. The lesson is that resistance without sufficient power is not strategic. It is noble, and it is ultimately tragic. Iran in 2026 is Dahomey in 1892 with nuclear ambitions. And Burkina Faso signing defense agreements in Tehran in February 2026 is, I'm sorry to say, a move that echoes the strategic errors of leaders who believed symbolic solidarity would translate into actual protection. So what should African governments actually do? I want to be honest with you. There is no easy answer, and anyone who gives you one is selling something. But let me give you the framework I've been developing, which I'm calling, for lack of a better term, conditional sovereignty strategy. The first principle is, build the infrastructure of independence before declaring the posture of independence. What does that mean practically? It means that a country like Burkina Faso cannot meaningfully partner with Iran or Russia or China as a strategic counterweight to the West until it has energy independence, food independence, and a domestic industrial base that can survive a sanctions regime. Right now, the AES countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, have expelled French forces and French ambassadors, which is a legitimate expression of frustration. But they have replaced French influence with Russian Wagner Group presence, which is not independence. That is a vendor swap. The second principle is, African collective security is not optional. It is the only lever that gives African states real negotiating power. The African Union's collective GDP is approximately $3.1 trillion as of 2025 data. That is larger than India. A unified African market, a genuinely unified one, not the aspirational version we discuss at summits, would change the calculus for every external power currently treating Africa as a chessboard. The African Continental Free Trade Area is the most important project on the continent right now, and it receives a fraction of the attention of any individual coup or conflict. The third principle is the hardest. African leaders need to stop using anti-Western rhetoric as a substitute for anti-poverty policy. I say this as someone who understands the legitimate historical grievances. The colonial record is real. The structural adjustment damage is real. But in 2026, a president who gives a passionate speech about sovereignty while his country's youth unemployment sits at 40% is not building sovereignty. He is performing it, and the audience for that performance pays the price. Let me tell you what I think happens in the next 6 to 18 months, because I want to be held accountable to a prediction rather than just an analysis. I think Operation Epic Fury will succeed in its immediate military objectives. Iran's government, as it existed before February 28, 2026, is finished. Whether a pro-Western transitional government actually stabilizes the country is a different question, and history suggests the answer is probably no, but that's a video for another day. On Africa specifically, here's what I'm watching. The AES countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, face a decision point in the next 90 days. Their Iranian partnerships are now diplomatically radioactive. They will either quietly distance themselves, or they will double down on Russian alignment as the only remaining counterweight. Watch the language coming out of Ouagadougou and Bamako in April and May 2026 very carefully. South Africa's government faces a genuinely difficult diplomatic moment. The ANC has historically maintained non-aligned principles that include relationships with Iran, Russia, and China. Those principles now carry a higher visible cost. I expect internal pressure within the government of national unity to produce a more explicitly neutral posture on the conflict. But I don't think South Africa has the political cohesion right now to make that pivot cleanly. Nigeria, Angola, and the other oil exporters are entering a windfall period that could either be transformative or wasted. We have seen oil windfalls in Nigeria before, the 2005 to 2014 period. It did not produce the structural transformation the country needed. The question for 2026 is whether there is enough institutional capacity and political will to use this windfall differently. I am cautiously pessimistic, but I am watching. Here is what I believe with more confidence. The Iran war has permanently accelerated the timeline on a question that Africa was going to have to answer anyway. That question is, what does it actually mean to be independent in a world where power is still concentrated? Military technology is still asymmetric, and the rules of international order are still written by the same countries that wrote the colonial ones. Iran spent 45 years building an answer to that question, and in 72 hours, that answer was bombed into rubble. Africa's answer, if it comes, will need to be built differently. Not through one country's resistance, but through the collective economic and institutional weight of an entire continent choosing, together, to be ungovernable by external force. We are nowhere near that, but that is the destination. And every African who understands what happened in Iran in March 2026 is one step closer to insisting their leaders start building toward it. I'll be back next week with a breakdown of exactly what the post-war economic reconstruction in Iran might look like and what opportunities and risks it creates for African contractors and governments. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss that one. Until then, stay informed, stay critical, and remember, the most powerful thing an African can do right now is understand the world well enough to change it.